Something is happening inside the Indiana Fever right now that nobody inside that organization wants to talk about on camera, and by the time you finish this video, you're going to understand exactly why the tension in that locker room has gotten so bad that people around the league are starting to ask questions out loud. Before we get into this, I need you to do one thing for me. If you have not subscribed yet, please take 2 seconds and hit that button right now, because I put a lot of time and a lot of heart into breaking these stories down for you honestly, without sugarcoating anything. And the only way this channel keeps growing is if you decide I have earned a spot on your subscription list. It genuinely means the world to me when you do that. So subscribe, hit the bell so you never miss an upload. And now let us get into the story, because there is a lot to unpack here. Let us set the scene properly. This is the 2026 WNBA season, and Caitlin Clark is no longer the rookie everyone was watching with curiosity. She is now the established cornerstone of the Indiana Fever, the single biggest reason this franchise sells out arenas on the road, the reason television ratings for this league have exploded, and the reason the financial future of an entire sport is riding on the health of one player's ankles and the chemistry of one specific locker room. That is an enormous amount of pressure to place on one 20-something athlete, but it is also just the reality of where this league is right now. Clark did not ask to be the financial engine of the WNBA. She simply played basketball at a historic level, and the business followed her. Every teammate on that Fever roster is, whether they like it or not, benefiting from the attention, the media coverage, the sponsorship dollars, and the increased salaries that Clark's presence has brought into this league. So when you sign a contract to play alongside her, there is an unwritten understanding that comes with it. You are going to be under a microscope you have never experienced before. Fans are going to know your shooting percentage down to the decimal point. Analysts are going to break down your every possession on national television. And yes, some of those fans are going to be brutally honest, sometimes too honest, about your performance when you are struggling. That is the price of playing in the brightest spotlight women's basketball has ever had. It is not fair in the traditional sense, but it is the deal every player agreed to the moment they put on that jersey. Which brings us to the center of this entire controversy, Fever guard Tai Harris. Over the last stretch of games, Harris has been dealing with a rough shooting slump, hovering around 31% from the field for the season, and an even more concerning number from beyond the arc, somewhere in the mid-teens. Now, slumps happen. Every player in professional sports goes through stretches where the shot is not falling, where the rhythm is off, where confidence takes a hit. That is not the story here. The story is how Harris chose to respond to criticism about that slump, and that response has opened up a can of worms that the Fever organization is going to be dealing with for weeks. After a particularly rough shooting night, a fan posted something sarcastic online, poking fun at the performance. It was later deleted, but not before Harris saw it and decided, instead of letting it roll off her back the way most professional athletes learn to do, she was going to respond directly and publicly. She wrote that people were preying on people's downfalls, and then added a line that has become the center of this entire firestorm, telling fans that they did not need to put other players down just to support. In her words, "Y'all Fave." Now sit with that phrase for a second, because the way she framed it matters enormously. She did not say, "our star player." She did not say, "our leader." She said, "Y'all Fave," which linguistically distances herself from Clark entirely. It reduces Clark from a teammate and franchise cornerstone down to something external, something that belongs to the fans and not to the team. It is dismissive. It is a little resentful sounding. And when a professional athlete chooses that specific phrasing about the most important player on her own roster, people are going to read into it, because language like that does not happen by accident. People choose their words very deliberately when they are frustrated, especially in the heat of an online argument. The reaction was immediate, and it was loud. Fans flooded the replies pointing out exactly what was wrong with the response. One fan wrote something along the lines of telling Harris she needed to log off, that it was deeply unprofessional to be arguing with supporters on social media, that comments like this create the appearance of resentment toward Clark, and that feeding into these online narratives only makes things worse for team chemistry. It was a fair, measured criticism, and instead of taking a breath and stepping back from the keyboard, Harris doubled down. She insisted that she was simply having a normal conversation like everyone else does on social media, that people were misreading her intentions, and that the locker room was completely fine behind the scenes. She specifically asked fans to trust her, to reread her tweets, insisting there was zero resentment toward Clark and that everyone on that roster was doing everything they could to help the team in any way possible. Here is the problem with that defense, though, and it is a problem that no amount of reassurance can paper over. You cannot tell an engaged, basketball-literate fan base that everything is perfectly fine when the box score says otherwise, when the win-loss record says otherwise, and when there have already been reports of a lengthy, tense team meeting that stretched on for roughly 2 hours trying to address exactly this kind of friction. You cannot ask people to ignore what they are watching with their own eyes on a nightly basis. Fans see hesitation on the court. They see certain players not looking for Clark on obvious cutting lanes. They see body language after tough losses that does not scream unity. And when you combine that on-court body language with off-court social media spats, you get exactly the kind of narrative that is currently swallowing this franchise whole. But if you thought the story ended there, it gets even more revealing. When fans continued telling Harris to simply log off and put her energy into her game instead of arguing online, her response was the moment that truly turned this from a minor dust-up into a real controversy. She pushed back, saying something to the effect of, "Why do people keep telling her to log off? It is her day off. Athletes are allowed to have conversations without everyone assuming they are fighting, and that her life is blessed and highly favored." Think about that phrase for a second. Her day off. When you are a professional athlete on a struggling roster, shooting under 20% from three-point range on the season, there really is no such thing as a day off in the way she is describing it. Elite competitors do not think in terms of contractual days off when their shot is broken. They think about extra reps in an empty gym. They think about hours of film study, breaking down their own mechanics frame by frame. They think about anything that closes the gap between where their game currently is and where it needs to be for the team to win. Instead, that free time, by her own admission, was spent scrolling through mentions and trading barbs with strangers on the internet. For a fan base that is watching Caitlin Clark battle through nagging injuries, playing through visible pain because she knows what her presence means for ticket sales and team morale, watching a struggling teammate brag about spending free time arguing online instead of in the gym is genuinely a hard pill to swallow. And this is where the story widens out, because Indiana is not an isolated case. This feels like a symptom of something bigger happening across the entire league this season, a kind of ego versus reality collision that is playing out on multiple rosters at once. Over in Seattle, veteran guard Skylar Diggins is dealing with her own very public unraveling. After it was announced that she would be shifting into a bench role to make room in the rotation, Diggins responded not with a quiet, professional adjustment, but with an unsettling video posted directly to her own social media. In the clip, she stares intensely into the camera and repeats, almost like a mantra, that she has been so quiet and been so good and quiet. There is no context given, no explanation, just this raw, uncomfortable moment broadcast to hundreds of thousands of followers. Watch it and you get the sense of someone who feels overlooked, someone who feels like their sacrifices have not been recognized, and someone who has decided the best outlet for that frustration is a smartphone camera rather than a private conversation with a coaching staff. And look, I understand competitive frustration. Anyone who has ever played sports at a high level knows that losing your starting role, especially after years of being the primary option on your team, stings in a way that is hard to describe to people who have not lived it. But there is a version of that frustration that channels into extra work, into film study, into proving your case on the practice floor, and there is a version that channels into cryptic, unsettling videos posted for public consumption. One of those builds your reputation as a professional. The other one gives every doubter ammunition and makes your own organization's job significantly harder. Take a deep breath with me for a second, because that video genuinely calls for one. In through the nose, out through the mouth. Because if there is one piece of advice half the players dealing with role changes and criticism this season need to hear right now, it is exactly that. Breathe, step away from the phone, and let your play on the court do the talking, because a screenshot lasts forever and it will always be there waiting to be replayed the next time you are struggling. So what connects these two stories, Tai Harris in Indiana and Skylar Diggins in Seattle? On the surface, they look different. One is a public argument with fans defending a struggling shooting slump. The other is a cryptic, emotional video about a benching decision. But underneath, they are the exact same story wearing two different costumes. In both cases, you have a talented professional athlete choosing public, unfiltered emotional expression over private, professional problem solving. In both cases, you have players who seem more concerned with managing public perception of their feelings than managing the actual basketball problem in front of them. And in both cases, the fan base, the very people paying for tickets, buying jerseys, and tuning in on League Pass, are left watching this unfold in real time, wondering whether the product on the floor is going to reflect the turbulence happening in the background. This matters enormously for a league that is at an absolutely critical inflection point in its history. The WNBA has never had more eyeballs on it than it does right now. Television deals have grown. Attendance numbers have grown. Merchandise sales have grown. A huge percentage of that growth traces directly back to the arrival of Caitlin Clark and the seismic shift in casual sports fan attention that came with her. That is not an opinion. That is a measurable business reality that every front office executive in this league is fully aware of. Which means the stakes for getting locker room culture right around her have never been higher. Every viral spat, every cryptic video, every passive-aggressive social media exchange chips away at the story the league desperately wants to be telling right now, which is one of unity, of growth, of a rising tide lifting every single roster in this sport. Instead, what we are getting, at least in these two specific cases, is a picture of players who seem more focused on protecting their individual social media narrative than protecting the collective good of their team and their league. And listen, I am not saying every single player in the WNBA is behaving this way. The overwhelming majority of players in this league handle criticism, role changes, and public scrutiny with grace and professionalism that honestly puts a lot of athletes in other sports to shame. But it only takes a handful of viral moments like these to create a perception problem, and perception, especially in the social media era, moves faster and hits harder than any box score ever will. So where does this leave the Indiana Fever specifically? If you are the head coach, if you are the general manager, if you are anyone in that front office with actual authority, the message needs to be crystal clear and it needs to be delivered immediately. Players are allowed to have personal social media accounts. Players are allowed to have opinions. What players are not allowed to do? If the organization has any interest in protecting its most valuable asset and its overall team chemistry, is engage in public back-and-forth arguments with the very fan base that is funding their paychecks. That is a rule that should not need to be written down, but apparently, in this specific case, it does. Because here is the truth nobody wants to say out loud. Every time a role player gets into a public spat defending their own shooting slump by taking a subtle shot at the franchise's biggest star, it does lasting damage. It gives opposing fan bases ammunition. It gives media pundits a storyline to chew on for weeks. It creates doubt in the minds of casual fans who are just discovering this league because of Clark, wondering whether they are walking into a genuinely unified team or a locker room quietly held together with tape. And most importantly, it puts unnecessary pressure on a superstar who is already carrying more weight on her shoulders than any 20-something athlete should reasonably have to carry. Caitlin Clark did not ask to be the financial savior of an entire professional league. She simply showed up, played elite basketball, and the business followed. Every single person benefiting from that surge in attention, from teammates to front office executives to league officials cashing bigger television checks, owes her a level of protection and unity that, at least in these recent incidents, does not appear to be showing up consistently. Now, to be fair, and I always try to be fair on this channel, we do not have full access to what is happening in that locker room behind closed doors. Public perception and private reality do not always match perfectly. It is entirely possible that Tai Harris and Caitlin Clark have a completely normal, respectful relationship away from cameras, and that this entire controversy is simply the byproduct of one bad night, one impulsive tweet, and an internet that never, ever forgets or forgives a poor choice of words. Athletes are human beings. They have bad days. They say things in the heat of frustration that they probably regret 5 minutes later. That is a real possibility here, and it deserves to be acknowledged honestly rather than dismissed for the sake of a more dramatic storyline. But here is why this still matters, even if the private relationship is perfectly fine. Perception drives narrative, and narrative drives pressure, and pressure drives performance. If the fan base believes there is friction in that locker room, that belief itself becomes a distraction the team has to manage, regardless of whether the underlying reality matches the perception. Coaches have to answer questions about it in every single press conference. Players get asked about it in every single post-game interview. It becomes background noise that follows this team into every single arena they play in for the rest of the season. And that kind of sustained distraction can absolutely bleed into on-court performance even when the actual relationships involved are healthy. So what happens from here? That is really the question everyone watching this story wants answered. Does the Fever organization step in and set clear, firm boundaries around social media conduct, the way a mature, well-run franchise should? Does Tai Harris take the criticism, learn from it, and quietly go back to letting her play on the floor do the talking, the way so many great professionals have done before her when they found themselves in a similar spotlight? Or does this simmer? Does it fester? Does it become the kind of ongoing subplot that follows this team all the way into the postseason, with reporters asking pointed questions every single time this roster underperforms? And over in Seattle, does Skylar Diggins find a way to channel that competitive frustration into a genuine on-court resurgence off the bench, proving her doubters wrong the right way, through winning basketball? Or does this cryptic video become the first chapter in a much longer story about a proud veteran struggling to accept a diminished role in the twilight of a decorated career? These are the questions this league is going to be answering in real time over the coming weeks, and honestly, that is exactly why stories like this matter so much right now. This is not just gossip for the sake of gossip. This is a genuine window into the growing pains of a league experiencing unprecedented, historic growth, a league where the business side is moving faster than some of the culture and chemistry on individual rosters can keep up with. Growth like this is rare, and it is precious, and it can be squandered just as easily as it can be built, especially if star players keep getting undermined by their own teammates in public view while the entire basketball world watches. If there is one thing every single player in this league should be taking away from these last 2 weeks of headlines, it is this. The audience watching right now is bigger than it has ever been in the history of this sport. Bigger platform means bigger scrutiny. Bigger scrutiny means every public misstep gets magnified tenfold compared to just a few seasons ago. The players who understand that, who put their phones down, who let their game on the floor speak louder than any tweet ever could, those are the players who are going to build lasting careers and lasting reputations in this new era of the WNBA. The players who keep choosing public arguments over private professionalism are the ones who are going to find themselves at the center of headlines like this one over and over again. And eventually that kind of pattern does start to follow a player around in ways that are much harder to shake off than a single bad shooting slump. So that is where things stand right now with the Indiana Fever, with Tai Harris, with Caitlin Clark, and with this strange wave of public frustration spreading across multiple rosters in this league at the exact moment the WNBA should be enjoying its biggest, most positive spotlight in franchise history. I will be keeping a very close eye on how the Fever organization handles this internally, whether we see any statements from coaching staff, and how Tai Harris responds on the court over the next handful of games, because in this league, more than almost any other, actions on the floor tend to speak far louder than anything said in a tweet. If you made it all the way to the end of this one, thank you genuinely for sticking with me through the entire breakdown. Let me know down in the comments what you think the Fever front office needs to do to fix this before it spirals any further, and whether you think Skylar Diggins bounces back the right way in Seattle. And if you have not subscribed yet, this is truly the perfect moment to do it. Because this story is far from finished, there is going to be a lot more to break down in the coming days, and I do not want you missing a single update. Hit that subscribe button, turn on notifications, and I will see you in the next one.